Welcome to the Group of Five Focus podcast, where we showcase the power of the Group of Five. I'm your host, Brian Doppel. This offseason, I'm releasing a new series here on the podcast where I get into the details of the most recent and ongoing conference realignment. To do that, I'll be joined by podcasters, journalists, and superfans of the teams that are joining new conferences. They'll help me get better insight into the players, coaches, and fans of each school and provide an introduction of the programs to their new conferences. This week, we're introducing the Jacksonville State Gamecocks to their new conference, the CUSA. I'm joined by Thomas Ashworth, sports editor of the Chanticleer, the student newspaper at Jacksonville State. He'll walk us through everything we need to know about the JSU football program as they transition to the CUSA. We'll get into it after the break. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and much more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place, and best of all, Anchor is totally free. Let me tell you from personal experience, when I first started this podcast, I knew about Anchor, but I wasn't sure if it was exactly the right tool for me. After a little poking around, I found that in fact it was. And when I had some questions when I first started my podcast, Anchor support was there to help. So if this sounds like it might be the tool for you to start your podcast, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, Thomas Ashworth, thank you so much for joining the Group of Five Focus podcast. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Thomas Ashworth. I'm a student at Jacksonville State, but I also serve as sports editor of the Chanticleer, which is Jacksonville State's student newspaper. It's been around for a long time, and we've moved to a lot of online publications, but we're enjoying that a lot. Definitely getting a lot of traction, especially with, a lot of stuff happening with Jacksonville State. Some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. I also serve as a sports correspondent for the Anniston Star, a local paper. I cover high school and some collegiate athletics, regional, and I write for a couple of blogs online. But yeah, I'm ready to talk about Jacksonville State football.
Awesome. So Jacksonville State, of course, is joining CUSA. Is the latest information I have is that they're going to be joining for the 2023 season. So for those listeners who are unfamiliar with Jacksonville State, making the transition from FCS to the FBS, can you talk a little bit about Jacksonville State and what they're about and what the university is known for as a whole?
Yeah. So Jacksonville State, it's a smaller school. It's not like your average, University of Georgia, not like your Georgia State even. It's a pretty small university. I think 8,000 total, but it continues to grow. But one of the really cool things about Jacksonville State is just like there's so much tradition, more so than even some of the bigger schools. Like some of these bigger schools, they have all these people that come in and then they leave. But the people are in Jacksonville, they come and they stay and they come to every single football game for the next 50 years. And until they can't walk up the stairs anymore, they're going to be at Jacksonville State football. It's really just a cool thing to see. The tradition around Jacksonville is just so awesome. And it's known as the friendliest campus in the South. And if you come here, you'll just be greeted with just what they call Southern hospitality. It's just really awesome to be around here.
Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds like a really welcoming campus experience. Can you tell me a little bit about Jacksonville State's football program? Can you tell me a little bit about maybe the history of it or of the style of play that is generally associated with Jacksonville State? I know that you have a brand new head coach this year, and so this might be changing very quickly. But I just sort of want to know what people sort of expect from Jacksonville State football.
Yeah, so Jacksonville State, they were a Division II program for a while. They were in a few conferences, and then they won a few championships. They got a few conference championships, and then they moved to FCS. And this was really like the big time for Jacksonville State. They won, they won a national championship in Division II in 1992. I could be wrong, but they continued to grow and they continued to just become like a powerhouse in the FCS. They won their conference I think 6 out of 7 times in the last, like, since 2013, I think. I could be mixing up my numbers, but they just became a powerhouse in the Ohio Valley Conference, and especially the FCS. They took a trip to the national championship, the FCS national championship in 2015. But yeah, they're just known specifically recently as a powerhouse in the FCS. They continue to just show up in the regular season. Whatever their postseason is, people fear Jacksonville State specifically. But then moving into the ASUN with a new conference with a new head coach, I really don't know what to expect. When you look at, when you see who the head coach is, Rich Rodriguez, it's kind of an oddball, especially around here. But it'll be really cool to see. As far as style of play, Jacksonville State has had really good pieces, specifically and defense. They've had DJ Coleman. He's an All-American FCS. He's a really good defensive end. We've had a really good secondary for the last couple of years, and we've had a really good running back room as well. So we run a lot, but those times that we pass are really awesome. They're really explosive plays, and Jacksonville State really just, as far as the style of play, it just changes year by year, almost game by game. You look at the stats game by game, and you just don't really know what to expect.
So yeah, I think that's part of the fun of FCS, and regular listeners know that I'm a graduate of Appalachian State, and so I got to sort of watch some of that FCS craziness go on, and then also I got to watch the transition from FCS to FBS with App, and so obviously some programs have made that transition well, some programs have struggled a little bit, but actually I'm curious, just for history's sake, for my understanding. Did Jacksonville State, did they compete in the Ohio Valley up until 2020, and did they only compete in the ASUN last season? Is that right?
That's correct. They competed in 2020, and then this season, well, the spring season, they competed in the Ohio Valley Conference, and then they had another fall season. The spring season was a crazy time for
Yeah.
FCS, specifically Jacksonville State. But they had that, and then they switched to the ASUN. And then they'll have one more year in the ASUN, and then they'll go to the Conference USA.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thanks for clearing that up.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, you mentioned some of the transition going on as far as head coach, Rich Rodriguez coming in. Can you tell me a little bit about the feelings around that? Obviously, that's a pretty big name for a hire at Jacksonville State. So, are folks excited about that? Or are people sort of skeptical about Rich Rod coming in? What's the feeling there?
I mean, if you look at some of our past head coaches, like if you look at one of our past head coaches, you see like the highest level that he coached was high school. You look at these guys, and most of the and specifically with Jacksonville State, especially with like most Alabama schools, besides like Alabama and Auburn, is that they're from Alabama. Like they're plucked from like really big high schools like Thompson or Hoover, or some of the really big names in Alabama. But this guy, it's very interesting having a guy coming in with like such a beefed up resume. I mean, he coached Michigan, he coached a really good team at West Virginia, took Arizona to a few bowl games. But having somebody that's competed really well at the Power Five level is something that like a lot of people are buying tickets to see this, because it's really, as we talked about, it's a very interesting time for Jacksonville State and all of like these schools that are being shaken up because of the conference switch. But really, in the case of Jacksonville State, it's just everybody's gonna want to be at a game just so that they can see what's happening around here.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Is it having an impact on recruiting that you've seen so far too? Or is Jacksonville State getting some maybe more recruits or higher caliber recruits than they have in the past?
I know that we've definitely gotten like a few 3 stars out of there, which is different than you would if you were playing in just FCS. But as far as Rich Rodriguez coming in, bringing some of his staff from ULM, some really good guys, and then the hope, and then the promise that you'll be featured on the big stage in Conference USA, and being part of that transition, being a part of the culture that is going to shift in Jacksonville. There's definitely a lot of there's a lot of attractive things about coming to Jacksonville State right now, especially for football. But I know that Rich Rodriguez talked about all the recruits, and he said that he got more recruits than he thought that he would this signing class. So really exciting stuff, and it seems like it's panning out pretty well so far.
Yeah, that's awesome. You never really have an idea of how a coaching change is going to impact recruiting or things like the culture, just like the general culture of a program. But can you give me an idea of what the culture of Jacksonville State football is? Are the players, is there like a deep connection between the players and the community or the team and the university? What is the general culture of JSU football?
Um, well, one of the things that we talked about is just like as far as the fans are concerned, they're rooted in. They're not leaving until they die. They're just so bought into this. They love everything Jacksonville State. As far as the football program, people are like really tied in. There's just like a lot of past players come in. They serve as whether it's a coach on the board. They're an advisor, whatever it is. They come back and a lot of people just come to retire here. There's just so many great things that come from Jacksonville State football. And like we talked about, the Ohio Valley Conference, they won their conference 6 times since 2014. Just being a powerhouse and being a consistent team has been really good for not just the school, but the players as well. Jacksonville State also boasts one of the greatest marching bands in the country. If you didn't know
Now
this,
we're talking.
yes, that one of the they are amazing. I'm a part of it, but they're there's like 500 people in this marching band.
Whoa.
It is insane. It's a lot of people come just to watch the band. They put on just awesome shows, and the football players did get into it, and it's insane. Just like the whole game day atmosphere with the players, the band, the tailgating, the fan base. You'd think that it's like Athens or Tuscaloosa sometimes, just how people are bought into Jacksonville State football. But it's just a great place to be on game day.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, yeah, and especially hearing about the marching band. I'm a former marching band guy myself. I was on the drum line, and so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, big respect for marching bands and pep bands and things like that. That's awesome to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And 500, that's crazy.
Oh yeah.
Um, so you mentioned the game day atmosphere. I'm curious to hear more about that. If someone's going to Jacksonville for their first JSU football game, like what can they expect as far as like a tailgate, the student section, the stadium experience? What is that going to be like for someone going to their first Jacksonville State game?
If you were coming to a Jacksonville State game with the expectation of not saying a word to anyone, you would fail within 5 minutes. Everybody is just so talkative. Everybody just wants to be there. Everybody wants you to be bought into it. The culture is just, as I talked about with the overall campus, the overall atmosphere of game day too, is just so warm, so welcoming, and really just inviting for any fan. It doesn't matter, like, clearly there's going to be cold blood between, rivals, but if you're there, then you're family. The student section, really great atmosphere as well. A lot of people like current students, past students, they're all bought into Jacksonville State football, and the student section is usually pretty packed. The band is right next to the student section, and the student section's like right next to the general admission. So it gets pretty loud in there. It gets very, very loud in there. With a 500 member band and a really packed student section, not going to not get loud. But
Yeah.
as far as tailgating, people bring their campers, people bring their RVs, and they some people are crazy. Like if it's really cold, they'll still be sitting outside, watching football, talking to their friends, and a lot of alumni, whether that's the football team, whether that's the band, whether that's just general population, a lot of alumni come back and they come to these games just with the expectation, not just watching football, but being able to, have some of those memories, being able to connect with some people that they used to go to school with.
That's really cool. And I'm looking here the at Burgess Snow Field. So is Burgess Snow Field at JSU Stadium, and it says on Wikipedia, at least my sources are confirming that capacity is around 24,000 for that stadium on any
Yep.
given Saturday. What are the numbers really looking like for a fan base at JSU Stadium?
Well, depending on the day, if we're playing somebody that's like, or that would be a rival, this is definitely going to be more packed, but it gets pretty rowdy in there. It's granted, the visitor section isn't always as packed as it could be if we're playing somebody like, Sam Houston or somebody like Eastern Washington. But if we're playing somebody like North Alabama or somebody that's local, like Chattanooga maybe as well, that place, the visitor section is going to be packed, the student section is going to be packed, and then the general admission is always packed. But it gets, I'd say about 70% of that stadium's full on a pretty good game.
Cool. I mean, that's a good numbers for a small school like Jacksonville
Oh yeah.
State. You said only 8,000 students. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned a little bit about the game itself, and we talked briefly about like the recruits that Rich Rodriguez is bringing in. But can you give me an idea of some really outstanding players that folks should be on the lookout for, whether it's this season coming up, their last in the ASUN, or looking forward to 2023 in CUSA? Any up and comers that folks should be on the lookout for to make a difference for Jacksonville State football?
One of the really interesting things about Jacksonville State right now is the quarterback room specifically. We had Zarek Cooper. He set a bunch of records. He was here for a long time, and now he's going to test the waters in professional football. But the quarterback room is basically vacant right now. It's up to the recruits. It's up to whoever they bring in. There's been a couple of really, really good guys that have come in and are going to try and compete for the starting job just right out of the gate. There's the opportunity to do so. As we talked about with DJ Coleman, we talked about some of the members of the secondary. Those are going to be really huge pieces. And there's been a few transfers. I know that there's been his name is Sterling Galvin. He's from Texas Tech. He was a 3-star out of high school. He came in. They're really excited to play for Rich Rodriguez. And as we talked about, the culture with Rich Rodriguez, there's some players that you see. There's some players like on the offensive line. There's some players who, in the wideout position, there's some of those players who you look at those guys and you see a lot of potential. But when you bring somebody like Rich Rodriguez in, you don't know how untapped that potential could really be whenever they, see the field for the first time, whenever they have a new mindset, whenever they have a new coach, and this staff is really good too. Some of these guys could have breakout seasons. It just kind of depends.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was going to ask you, what is it clear that Jacksonville State is missing something? Is there a missing piece that might hold them back from success at the next level in the FBS? Or is that sort of still being figured out with the new coaching staff?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at any team, like if you look at a new coach or a new conference or really anything, new quarterback, whatever it is, you're going to see some initial struggles. And that's a given. But with Jacksonville State, I mean, you have really good pieces. You're bringing in really good recruits. It's kind of a fresh face, especially for kind of just a blank slate. We've had a coach for a long time. John Gross was here for a long time. Now he's on offensive staff at Clemson. He came on there, and then having a new conference, having a new quarterback, having a new head coach, having new staff. You could see this team really making a splash with their first season with Rich Rodriguez. But their goal is to always win championships. But it'll be really interesting to see how the mindset has shifted.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, with joining a group of 5 conference, it's hard. It was at least hard, I think, for what I'm most familiar with, which is the App fan base. When we were competing in the FCS playoffs every year, almost 3 straight national championships from 05 to 07, to go to the Sun Belt, which at that time had a pretty low public persona. People didn't think very highly of the Sun Belt at that time, and of course it's nearly impossible to compete for a national championship in a group of 5 conference. But I think that something that the group of 5 offers is those really great opportunities for conference championships. I mean, I don't remember, of course, competing in the Southern Conference. App had a good time every year and competed highly against like really great opponents in the Southern Conference, and that mattered a lot. But it was always going towards the playoffs. Here in the group of 5, the goal is almost always a conference championship and a bowl win. So I'm looking forward to when Jacksonville State joins the CUSA, and the CUSA is going to be Florida International, Jacksonville State, Liberty, Louisiana Tech, Middle Tennessee, New Mexico State, Sam Houston, also from the FCS, UTEP, and Western Kentucky. When you look at that upcoming list of conference members, does anyone jump out as like a natural rival, or someone that you think Jacksonville State is really going to get pumped to play every year or every other year?
Yeah, one of the things that stands out is the shift of other FCS schools. One of the things being Liberty. If you Liberty's a really good football program, but if you look at their basketball program, they're a really good mid-major school. They have really good facilities, they have really good players, and Jacksonville State kind of if you follow basketball, you'll know that Jacksonville State shook up Liberty. They snapped a 46 home game win streak in Liberty, and
Oh
so
yeah, I saw that.
there's gonna be some natural rivalry right there. But as far as the other teams, these other teams, they're not like bad teams at all. They're really good teams. They're Western Kentucky's a team that's, they prove time and time again. They had really good quarterback play this season. You look at Middle Tennessee, you look at all these guys. You look at Sam Houston, they won a national championship not too long ago. And these are really, really good caliber teams. And the potential for exploring other non-conference matches against other Group of 5 teams, the potential for a really good conference schedule is going to be really interesting for Jacksonville State.
Yeah, I know that Troy and Jacksonville State is like an old historic rivalry.
Oh yeah.
Is that something that you think could be rekindled now that Jacksonville State's joining the Group of 5? You think you'll see Troy on the schedule anytime soon?
I think that if it doesn't happen, then fans are probably going to be like banging on, the athletic director's door saying, we're missing an opportunity here, because they love Jacksonville State, and they love everybody, but when it comes to Troy, they they will yell at them like so much that they just like walk out of the stadium. It's crazy how much, you think, are they Jacksonville State fans or are they just like Troy haters?
Where does
Especially
that
like
rivalry come from? Is it just because, are you actually physically pretty close to each other?
yeah, Troy is not too far. I think less than 100 miles for sure.
Oh wow.
And in the early like especially whenever both teams were Division II, there was a ton of rivalry. It was like a lot of people just came from near and far just to watch this rivalry between these two schools. And with Troy being in the Sun Belt now, I think, are they in the Sun Belt? Yes.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
With Troy being in the Sun Belt, Jacksonville State, just now creeping their way up to the Power Five. I definitely see potential for some non-conference games with Troy.
Cool. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Mhm.
And I think that Jacksonville State, the way you're describing it, sounds really exciting and like really promising for their transition. It sounds like they're in a really good spot, and they have Rich Rodriguez sort of leading them, and he has a ton of experience, of course. So as far as Jacksonville State's performance in the CUSA in their first few years, do you think it's going to be a difficult transition, or do you think that they're going to be able to sort of hang with some of these other Group of 5 schools that have been there for a while? What do you anticipate Jacksonville State's success to be in the new conference?
Well, I know that specifically with Rich Rodriguez's case, you look at other teams that have hired some like different coaches. Maybe they promoted an offensive coordinator, maybe they promoted a defensive coordinator, but Rich Rodriguez is probably the biggest the biggest name that Jacksonville State has seen in a while. Step through their staff, and granted, he's had a lot of success, but when it comes to what the players think about him, I can't really speak for that. But you have to think that they think highly of him just because of his resume and just the way that he's proven. I guess with West Virginia, with Arizona, he did a really good job. With Michigan, he coached there, but
Yeah.
as far as as far as his resume and what he brings to the table for Jacksonville State, it's just really a wild card. I mean, he could definitely help them make a run for a conference championship this year, but who really knows what's going to happen with Jacksonville State?
Yeah.
As we talked about with fresh faces, there's a lot of new players, a lot of untapped potential that could be brewing for Jacksonville State. So I'm really just excited to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. As someone who is not does I don't have any personal ties to CUSA or to Jacksonville State, but whenever there's a team making a move for the community, for the university, and they look like they're poised to do so in like a really positive way, I'm always interested, and so I'm excited to see what Jacksonville State does, and I think they're going to make a splash in this new look CUSA. So definitely going to keep an eye out for it, and yeah, we're excited for that transition. I wanted to give you a moment to share any projects that you've been working on, or share where people can find your work in case they want to, communicate with you, or just read or listen to anything that you're up to. So go ahead, plug away.
Yeah. So as I talked about, I'm part of the Chanticleer, which is Jacksonville State's student newspaper. I serve as sports editor, and we've been working on a ton of stuff. There's just been so many big things. It's almost baseball season, basketball season is coming to a close, and Jacksonville State's had a really successful basketball season. So we're just, chugging along, getting these articles out, and really trying to cover as much as we can. But with how Jacksonville State's doing in the ASUN, there's just a lot that can be covered. But if you want to follow that, be sure to follow the Chanticleer on all our social media outlets. But there's just a lot of exciting things going on in Jacksonville, and it's a really exciting time to follow it. So
cool. That's awesome. Well, yeah, we'll be sure to link those socials and any other resources in the show description. So thanks for sharing that. And yeah, folks, be sure to go follow Thomas on Twitter, especially. Definitely a good follow. Definitely a big Jacksonville State fan. I've enjoyed following and following along with the stuff that he's doing. So be sure to show him some support as well. And yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap there. Thomas, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, appreciate it.
That's all for this episode of the Group of Five Focus podcast. Thanks to Thomas Ashworth for shedding some light on the Jacksonville State Gamecock football program. Be sure to follow and support Thomas and the Chanticleer by following the links in the episode description. I'd also love to connect with more listeners, so please reach out on social media at G5FPod to keep the conversations going. And if you haven't already, please follow, rate, and review the pod on your podcast platform of choice. Let me know what you've enjoyed and what you'd like to hear more of. And as always, be sure to share this podcast with anyone you know that might enjoy some of the Group of Five content we're putting out. Until next time, my friends, my question for you is, what is one thing you can do to showcase the power of the Group of Five?